everybody.
Chapter.
All right, welcome. My name is Rich Reed, and I'm the director of the Southwest Harbor Public Library. And thank you for coming out on this radiant day. Just a quick pitch for two upcoming Tuesday events. We have the Power Play with Matt Cornish, the director of Camp Beechcliff. That's going to be in person only for all ages. And then we also will have Billy Halprin pitching the looms of MDI. And then today, we're really happy to have Orono poet Kathleen Ellis, who's recently published book, Body of Evidence, that she'll be reading some for, and we'll have books for sale, after the reading. This book's won the 2022 Grayson Books Poetry Award. Ellis teaches poetry and creative writing at the University of Maine, and she's received fellowships from the National Endowment, the Arts, and the Maine Arts Commission. We also have one of our active patrons, Gary Rainford, here today. Thank you, Gary. He's the author of 3 poetry collections, Adrift, Salty Liquor, and Liner Notes. He lives on Swans Island year-round. We last hosted him as he read from Adrift, the stories of his mother's dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Please warmly welcome Kathleen Ellis.
And it's great to be reading today with someone I've never met before, so that would be nice to hear what your work's like. And also to see old friends. And I'm going to talk a tiny bit about how this book developed, because it was somewhat odd in a way. So most of the poems in this book were written over the last couple of years, so during COVID. And my partner's mother died of COVID early in the pandemic. And a few years earlier, we brought her. Can everyone understand me through the?
You can take it off. The speaker can take it off.
What?
The speaker can take their mask off. You're the speaker, so you can.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
Up to you.
Somebody told me at a reading recently that they liked it that I had my mask on because it had to do with a lot of the poems. So I'm going to try it this way for a while. Does that help? I mean, I can broadcast my voice.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Talk loud.
I will. So a few years earlier, we brought my partner's mother here from Denver to Orono to live a few miles down the road from us at a senior living facility. And a doctor checked in with her regularly. And at one point, we were told the doctor was going to administer COVID vaccinations if the residents agreed to have that. And so we coached Bruni on how to respond, because she had some dementia and didn't always remember things. And also she had some bad experience with other vaccinations. And when the doctor came around, she answered no instead of yes. And a few weeks later, she fell and was put in a nursing facility in Bangor. And during that time, the facility had an outbreak of COVID. And Bruni, still unvaccinated, died of the virus. Along with the grief of losing her came an extreme reaction of guilt and shame that welled up in me and wouldn't go away. I began to wake around 3 a.m. to memories and new lines of prose poems about my childhood as a Christian Scientist, unvaccinated, and believing in the words of the religion's founder, Mary Baker Eddy, in her very famous among Christian Scientists, scientific statement of being, which as children, we had to recite every Sunday at Sunday school out loud. And in my half-waking state of mind, I asked myself, what if a child had to recite the scientific statement of being every week in Sunday school, trying to get some kind of distance between myself as having done that and what that looks like. I only remember part of it now. I just don't know it by heart, of course, but it goes something like this. There is no life, truth, intelligence, nor substance in matter. Spirit is immortal truth. Matter is mortal error. Matter is the unreal and temporal, Spirit is God and man is his image and likeness. Therefore, man is not material. He is spiritual. So out of that, you should have gotten that, that religion, does not, Mary Baker Eddy, supposes that we do not have a body. And so for children to deal with that is very difficult. Many of the short prose poems coming to light through my kind of subconscious memory make up the first third of the book Body of Evidence. And I recognize these poems as disclosures from what I've tried for so long to keep hidden from others, but mostly from myself. Later, when the publisher asked if I had any suggestions for the cover art, I immediately thought of Annalise Giacomini's work. And she sent me a dozen mixed media pieces to consider, and I immediately chose what she calls perfectly flawed in the crack of time. Somehow that fit for me as far as my background. And there's a girl's eyes peering out. Many people say, is that you? Is that you? No, that's not me. But the girl's eyes are peering over the cover, the fingers reaching out, the array of human figures falling from the top of the cover, and the sign in the left-hand corner, it says, vote for women, votes for women. And of course, the great title, perfectly flawed in the crack of time. So I wanted to give you that background so that you have a little more of an idea of what these poems are about and how difficult it is to live with not having most vaccinations when I was in school, and having gone through the polio scare. There were 3 or 4 people in my neighborhood, children, who had polio, and my mother apparently had possibly had polio. We have no idea because she didn't go to the doctor, but her mother was a practitioner, and a practitioner is somebody who, instead of a doctor, is a Christian Scientist who basically prays with you and reads from Science and Health, Mary Baker's book, in order to heal you. And so it's done without doctors. And during that scare in my neighborhood, people pointed their finger at, we must be the cause because we're the people who don't get vaccinations. So I'm going to start in the beginning. If you have the book, I'm going to read mine. I'm going to start on page 12. The Spanish flu, so we're going back into the 1919s, 1918, 1919. My mother was born without a body. At least that's what my grandmother said. I always wondered why my mother was born at home. Was it the Spanish flu, or that her mother was a Christian Scientist? Before she died in her 80s of septic shock, she went into a coma where there is no body, where nobody believes. And I've tended to not read any poems about my father, but I'm going to read one right now, which is on page 14. Body parts 1, and I have body parts 2, 3, and 4, and they're spread out intermittently in the book. Body parts 1. So I grew up on an island of Alameda in San Francisco Bay, and most of the island was from fill from the remains of the fire after the San Francisco earthquake. I move at the speed my father swam from the Navy end of Alameda toward Treasure Island. Sailors are combing the beach where my father teaches me how to breaststroke. When he was a boy, the bay was filled with sewage, and this was his stroke for dodging the undesirable. My father tells me to look at the city across the bay. Look at the aircraft carriers heading into the post-war Pacific cleanup. Do not look back. I'm almost 5 and topless, and it is years before I will cover my chest. For now, my father is teaching me the breaststroke, what to look out for. Yeah. So in the 50s, at least in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, it wasn't that unusual to have a lot of classmates who were Christian Scientists. When we moved elsewhere, when the polio scare came out, there were fewer and fewer of them, but on Alameda, there were quite a few. And so I went to Sunday school and we all knew each other. And this is about one incident that happened called False Alarm. We're 8 and reading from Science and Health by Mary Baker Eddy in a circle at Sunday school when a car backfires outside. The teacher thinks it's for real and makes us hide under our seats. She hushes us, but we can't resist the giggles. She's waiting for the all clear that never comes. Somebody raises a hand from a seat and asks, from under a seat and asks, "Did you think we were going to die?" And if you don't have a body, you don't die, according to that religion. Ghost Child is a poem that's written in couplets, and it is about my experience of talking with my grandmother when I didn't feel well or had an earache. But in this case, my mother is on the phone, but I'm the one who has the earache. Ghost Child. When there was an earache, but no earache, no, this never happened. When there were measles and whooping cough, and my palms were clasped awkwardly together, and my mother was on the phone with her mother, the practitioner, I felt the shape of the word made stone inside my chest. And circling that terrible desire to escape, I am not certain whether inward or outward, my mouth had opened wide for the breath flying out of the body. Third grade, SNL Avenue. We lived on the street that had a middle strip down it that had trees and grass. And across the middle strip, my friend lives in the upstairs of a house. Each day we walk to school together. After school, we play 2 games of hopscotch, and then I cross the strip to my house. My friend is black. One night, sirens wake me to streams across the strip. Policemen carry a stretcher down the steps as people gather, blaming the upstairs family for ruining the neighborhood. That's when I see my friend in tears. As her brother bleeds to death, we embrace until we are pulled apart. The next week, they move away. Well, there's no priest or pastor in the Christian Science Church. There is a system of 2 people from the church who are readers, and they read from what's called the lesson, which is designed by the mother church in Boston and sent out to everybody in the form of something called the quarterly. So you have all the places where you're supposed to read during the week, and you're supposed to do that every day. And my mother did that every day. My mother reading the daily lesson in solitude. My mother has locked herself in her bedroom, and we've been ordered not to let a pin drop. 40 minutes later, she emerges silent, but beatific. Still in her robe, she answers our questions with an eerie smile. She does not make us feel happy. She makes us afraid. What is she not telling? So when I was in grammar and part of high school, Christian Science brought 3 cards to school that were put on file. One was yellow, one was pink, one was blue, and one was so that you would not be inoculated or given any shots of any kind or given any treatment, medical treatment at all. The next one was that if in class there was anything being taught about human biology, you had to leave the classroom. And I can't remember what the other one was. 6th grade science class. When the teacher assigns a project on human cells, he motions for me to leave the room. I head for the library to read about whales. Their huge bodies, titanic heads, blowholes sprouting breath into vapor. They can stay underwater for over an hour. Instead of reading more, I draw a picture of a girl with a sharp-edged fluke, holding her breath for what seems like forever. Treading water. When I was a girl, I swam out of the body, whose image dives again and again into the center of the widest ocean. I made myself weightless on purpose for this entering into blue, the first color, and darker still beneath my fins, my legs appearing and disappearing, treading water. I never read this one. I think I'll read this one. It's on page 33. You are not who you think you are. According to a recent study, 43% of our everyday actions are habitual. The beginning of you each day is already known by this body of you, yet it is not you. More than half of you is still waiting to know what to accept, what to reject, how to act in this world. More than half of you is becoming someone else. On page 35, condolences, it's called, and my grandmother, the Christian Science practitioner, died, and so they had a Christian Science event. Not sure what they call it exactly. It's not a funeral, but there was a casket there, and I went, and I was in college. Condolences. All through childhood, my grandmother reminds me I have no body. No body to suffer, to ache, to know pain or death. When she dies in the 1960s, there is no body in her casket. At the service, the man with the kindly eyes rattles off all the good she's doing in her life in the present tense. No one approaches the casket. Nobody checks to make sure. It's very strange. Page 37. This is body parts 2. The body is a landscape bordered by the bay on one side and foothills on the other. When I watch the troop ships duck under the bridge from Oakland on their way to Indochina, I think of you. You are not the boy who's going to have your head blown off in men. The boy named Larry, you have a name, who sat near me in orchestra, I on strings, you on drums. I've mixed you up with someone who no longer exists. And moving out of childhood into adult ones. Body politic, it's on 45. Again, this is in long couplets. Body politic. We are laying our bodies down in public places, learning to speak between the lines. We are the news of the world in sound bites, the falling man from the North Tower. We are the woman who walks into a loaded rifle of a boy soldier in 1980s Guatemala. We are the colonized body, the exploited body, the body ravaged with violence, the migrant body escaping violence. We are the body of a country waking every day with sorrow in the heart. And I have some, do I have like 5 minutes left? Approximately. Okay. Page 52, touch and go. So it was it's still in progress. Movement from not believing in the body to becoming aware and more sensate of everything around me. Touch and go. I touch everything that matters. Nouns, pronouns, body parts. When I climb to the top of Half Dome, the valley below is tempting. I want to lean over and touch the frigid water of the Merced River below. I want to smooth my hand along the face of El Capitan. I want to try a few touch and goes, swooping down, then landing and taking off again. That girl's bruise on her shin when she fell on the trail, that man's bicep bulging out of his t-shirt, this gnarled juniper clinging to life between the granite cracks. I want to touch them all. I want to touch the world that has knocked me sensei. So, the grasping here. And since I talked about it to start with, I have written a poem called Love in the Time of COVID for RW. After you visit your mother who has tested positive, I tiptoe around you as though you are contagious. I imagine you wrapped in a hazmat suit, making your way to the ward where your mother lies struggling for air. At first, she's confused about who you are. You are the body of her body, the one she has always loved. Years ago, we met by chance in a rehearsal for Ion, translated by HD. You played Hermes, wrapped in a plastic shower curtain toga. Hidden from the audience, I read HD's notes from an upstairs platform. I, you, and now we go to sleep in one body and wake up in another, sight unseen. Fragments. No, Denver. Some say the body is obsolete. In 7 years, the cells retrench into something else, the flawless skin wandering back out of the sea. How what we begin, we only think as ourselves, alone, together. How quickly we separate, drift off until we are some other life spreading the air. I have a memory. It swims deep in blood, a delta in the skin. It carries my arms and legs to these places, to the bottom of a pool where I tried to save a boy who did not make it, to the edge of an island that surrounds me with its mothball fleet of blood, hair, and teeth, hauling themselves out of their long winter's sleep. Maybe the body is what we are looking for as evidence. And I know I have seen Portola in 1767, sitting high in the saddle on Mount Diablo, holding his hand to his eyes and looking out across the bay, where anyone might be my father, and I anyone's daughter. As I stride through the 21st century, I wonder where else a child could grow up denying what it is like to be robbed of solid weight and mass, to be robbed of space, to shiver in the indelible cold. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. San Francisco, I went to grad school at Sac State. My first teaching job, college teaching job at Fresno.
I went to UC Davis for my freshman year.
Okay.
There were like 15 minutes.
Yeah, real close. Since it's National Poetry Month, Oscar Wilde said. Oscar Wilde said, "To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people only exist." For me, poetry, writing poetry, reading poetry, the poetry of every sunrise, the wind poetry that thunders down Atlantic Road and rips shingles off my roof. The poetry of everybody's face right here, right now. It's beautiful. I had a good time putting together a set for today. Thinking about I'm gonna say natural every time now, National Poetry Month. And when I think of April, I think of spring. So I wrote, what does this month mean to me thematically? And then I selected poems. So, I'm hoping the poems will touch on these themes. So they can sort of swim in your head. Spring, seasons, change, cycles, renewal, love, life, birds singing, friendship. I live on Swans Island, and I love this story because I don't have these kind of stories from where I grew up on Long Island, New York. So I bought a house in 2003, and the house was the second or third deeded property on Swans Island. It had never been out of the Staples family since the mid 1800s. And so it's an honor for me to be there. And there's been a garden on that property for as long as my neighbors have been there. And it didn't seem right not to let them continue gardening. And so I, over the years, have eaten my fair share of vegetables. And the vegetable that's my favorite is carrots, because Sue prepares carrots for me that last all year long. And the last few years, they've flooded out or bugs got to the carrots, or for whatever reason, I didn't get carrots. But this year, or fall of 22, I got my carrots. This is local Vors. You gather the last few fresh carrots from a fish tote that keeps all winter in your cellar. Stack them in a stainless steel colander painted white. The feckin' smell of manure sharp. The moist loam mud between your fingers. Sue puts up a bushel for you from her garden. 6 or 8 layers of carrots and moss as wadding that she collects from the other side of the island. Her mother-in-law gets a bushel for canning, and what doesn't rot by the cold, hard rains in November, Sue blanches, then freezes in trim, vacuum-sealed quart pouches. But you prefer the ceremony. Heading back upstairs to the kitchen, scrubbing an epic of dirt off each one, slicing them into piles of orange coins, and for a split second, when the June of last year's carrots sizzle in a cast iron skillet spinning butter, the seasons are as sacred as places. I had to Google this. I wasn't quite sure how it works with Groundhog's Day when the groundhog sees or doesn't see his shadow. So the groundhog did not see his shadow this year. So this is back in 2014. Groundhog's Almanac. Have a good day, I say to Clay. We're pulling into the ferry slip. It's cold. Chunks of ice in the harbor scrape the hull. That reminds me. Clay smiles, adjusts thick winter gloves. I read a bumper sticker just recently. A good day is any day above ground. That's one way to live, I suppose, I reply. Above ground is the only way to live. Clay laughs, zips up his jacket, the sky moody, clouded over, like the promissory note of early spring. Oh, you grew up on Long Island, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, summer.
Okay. So when I think of spring, I think of Marty. And this is totally spring of either 85 or 1986. And I love how, for me at least, experience, not just poetry, but experience is sort of like a time machine. You can be doing something right now, but something about that experience just triggers a memory and transports you 30, 40 years even longer. I love that experience. Rites of passage. I'm stretched out on the pine floor, wet sanding the areas where 5 coats of tung oil resin formed hard, gritty pearls, not smooth glass like the online video pledged. WKIT, Stephen King's rock and roll station, is tuned in on the radio, fog hat belting out, slow ride. The blue, sunny sky day reminds me of Marty, a high school friend who had just passed the exam for his junior license, which meant he could drive almost anywhere, to school and work, to his girlfriends, even Jones Beach. But his car, a 1975 2-door Chevy clunker, had to be home and parked by sunset by curfew. For weeks, we banged out dents. We scrubbed away rust with wire brushes, smeared cans of creamy Bondo to every square inch practically, and then, like sculptors, we wet sanded and smoothed all the rough gray patches to near perfection. And one morning, the sun and cicadas screaming, Marty asked if I knew how to buy lingerie. Buy what? I replied, turning the word lingerie over and over in my head, how it rhymed with dungaree. Oh, is that sexy underwear? The lacy stuff. Me and Denise's 1-year anniversary's next week. Marty, I snorted. It's lingerie, not lingerie. Stick to flowers, dude. Boxes of chocolates. I don't think you're ready for lingerie. We laughed like monkeys, and Marty finally had the car painted blue. My second book is a collection of 64 frastic poems. Praxis is an ancient practice of describing works of art using words in a nutshell. So this was really fun. I described musicians as artists making music as art. And that was the goal for this collection. So I needed to find some love songs though. So I picked a few fun ones. This is an interesting story because there's a companion piece that goes with this that I'll read as well. So when I turn on the news, actually I don't turn on the news anymore. When I look at the headlines on Google for news or NPR when I get in the car, I always wonder is what I'm hearing true. And these next 2 poems, so to speak, that possibility. American recordings, Mexican mariachi style horns brass the Grand Old Opry. Love is a burning thing. Johnny Cash confesses wholeheartedly. A bass baritone who carries his guitar as if it were a Tommy gun, spitting bullets. Johnny's first wife claims he wrote Ring of Fire drunk and pilled up, that it's about betrayal. But their daughter, Roseanne, caught in the barrage, says the song's about change, the power of love. That's a sweet possibility. His wife at the time, however, has a different story. Wildwood flower. June Cotter Cash plucks a Grand Old Opry of heartbreak on the auto harp. There is no way to be in that kind of hell. No way to extinguish a flame that burns, burns, burns. June wrote after reading Love is like a burning ring of desire, underlined in her uncle's Elizabethan book of poetry. So who knows? Who knows where that came from? Still a good song. Anybody see Elvis Costello at the Collins Center in 2013, 14? I remember seeing Elvis Costello. It was really pretty awesome. It was like seeing Elvis Costello in this setting, because the Collins Center is just an intimate venue. And it was strange because the last time I saw Elvis Costello was in the 90s, and I was in the nosebleeds at Madison Square Garden, and the place was just packed. So what a shift. But no less as exciting. My aim is true. Arrested for busking outside a London convention of record executive mucky mucks who wouldn't release his music to the United States. Elvis Costello alerts voices in my head, riptides, edgiest protest, decades later, Orno, Maine. Oh, my baby, baby, I love you more than I can tell. I don't think I can live without you. Elvis rails about romance, afflictions of infidelity, Stetson hat, Buddy Holly glasses, blurred Polaroid man of singularity. A love song, a love poem that's edgy love, hard love. And I always botch the title, but the translation is "Do Not Leave Me," so anyone who speaks French will probably get it right. No, mu, no me, quitte pas. No me quitte pas. Love me, love me, love me. Say you do. Nina Simone pianos the keys, trembling. Her voice between the F below middle C is bipolar. Pledging with Andrew, her husband, who protects her from everybody but himself. Lisa, their daughter, recalls the bloodbaths, the whiplash backhands, the sticks of dynamite and honey that fueled her mother's love affair with fire. Inside, I'm screaming. Diary entries reveal Nina's ruckus despair, desperate as sleeping pills, raw as talent, begging for relief. I like this one because it gives me a lot of hope. I always thought as a kid that, as you get older, life's going to just get easier. It seems to be the opposite. Not that anybody can relate. Closing time, mandolin, violin, fedora, tailored black suit Renaissance man, and 3 red robins singing into one mic. Leonard Cohen is on his knees at Mount Baldy Zen Center after 5 years in seclusion. Jakan, which means silence, is his Dharma name. Love is to overlook and forgive. Cohen's voice relaxes, finds an easy way to discuss self-reform. It's not a cry that you hear at night. It's not somebody who's seen the light. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. He sings in Halifax, all his money gone, retirement accounts and charitable trust funds embezzled by a close friend. Getting older, Cohen says, in defiance of body decay, a lifelong depression has lifted. In 2017, I brought my mother to Maine. Her husband died, and I found myself being her principal caregiver, her guardian, her power of attorney. Living on Swans Island complicates this matter quite a bit. So I found a good place for mom in Bangor and went off twice a week for 4 years. She died in 2020. We're about midway into her decline. She doesn't know who I am at this point. She kind of thinks I'm family, I'm familiar. So I'm driving north on the 95 and I'm about that place where the 182 or the 185, the exit that takes you to Ellsworth is coming up. And I'm just conflict, 180 pounds of conflict. I can go home, catch the ferry, the last ferry, or I can keep driving to Ohio Street and go see mom. And then just as though it fell out of the sky, it was almost like a mantra fell out of the sky. And it's just this little poem. And I had my answer, called Karma. Bobby, I call my mother Bobby in the book. So this is when I say Bobby, that's mom. Karma. I stopped at Bobby's to give her a kiss because in each of us is all of us. In each of us is all of us. So I had to go and just give my mom a kiss, whether she knew me or not, because one day that might be me sitting in that bedroom by myself. And I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I hope she comes and gives me a kiss. Or I hope anybody comes and gives me a kiss, honestly. Reincarnation. I remember this place, says Bobby, exploring the tree line from a rocking chair outside Winterberry Heights and watching the birds. You've been here before, Mom? I say. Oh, sure. I used to come all the time. Bobby's eyes are dreamlets. That borderland, not quite awake, not quite asleep. Tranced and peaceful. Don't argue, I tell myself. Let her be wherever she thinks here is. Who knows, says my brother when I tell him about my visit. Maybe Mom in another life was a bird. Reflecting on the 4 years of taking care of my mom, I sometimes felt like I was a little cavalier about life, honestly. And it still strikes me how much the body and the mind and the soul doesn't want to go, doesn't seem to want to go. And there were several times where I just couldn't believe what Mom was doing. What are you holding on to? What's keeping you here? Life alert. Balancing a tray of coffee, hot chocolate munchkins, and my laptop, I thumb the 4-digit code into the keypad that unlocks memory care. The door clicks, the light turns green, and Bobby is sleeping, sitting up in the common area. Other women at various stages of dementia and sickness sitting there too. Carol picking at scrambled eggs and honeydew melon. Diane, trying not to be seen, covers her face with a napkin. Francis cradling a naked baby doll. The medtech Denise, whose army son recently graduated boot camp, smiles, says hello, cheery as a bowl of candy red apples, and tells me how my mother dressed herself this morning, like she's learning instead of dying. Mom. I kiss her head and whisper, are you done with this life yet? Bobby's eyes open slowly. Spot the box of munchkins. And she replies, no, I'm trying to keep it. There weren't many things I wasn't able to do for my mom, but the one thing I could not do, I guess if I could have, if I had to, was change her diaper. It just was I don't know. There's one poem that I'm not gonna read, it's kind of funny. She had an itch and it was on her butt, and she wanted me to scratch, and I said, Mom, it's unseemly for sons to scratch their mother's cushion. And I just couldn't change her diaper. So I was really grateful for the people who could. There's so much love in assisted living facilities. It's unbelievable. It's a special love that people bring to these places. Dignity. Picture this man. He's in his mid-30s, very black, which stands out for me. I miss diversity living in Maine. There are not very many. We're not very culturally diverse. And so Berg's always stood out. And big dude, dignity. And my mom's just tiny and frail. Dignity. I'm here to help, says Berg, showing Bobby a clean diaper in his bag. Hold my shoulder. I got you. His voice reassures her. I'll read one last poem. It's kind of funny. It was a crisis. My stepfather died in December, and then all of a sudden my mom's alone in Florida, and I had to sort of deploy people until I can get down to Florida. And I closed up her house, packed up her rav, brought her north, and then I went back during spring break when I wasn't teaching. And I went through everything she had and made decisions that I never thought I'd have to make about her belongings, what she needed, what she didn't need. She didn't need anything. And I came across her high school yearbook, 1856, and you know how you write to whomever, Carl had a great life. Kathleen, you were such a great friend. Everybody was writing to Bobby in the yearbook, but my mother's name was Barbara. And I remember bringing it back to my mom and said, Mom, who's Bobby in the yearbook? This is you. This is, I don't know what this is, she tells me. So just seemed fitting for Bobby to be the protagonist in these poems. I had been using Barbara in all the poems, but then it wasn't right until I shifted to Bobby. All we want is love. You bring me light, says Bobby, as I guide a fork full of shredded egg sandwich to her lips. There's a familiar focus in her eyes and a clarity to her words, but neither lasts more than a wink. I do not want to watch my mother dying today, but we do not get to cherry pick when life needs or does not need us most. Thank you very much for coming out.
Does anybody have any questions for either Gary or Kathleen?
Well, Gary, your poem about Nina Simone just reminded me to recommend to people, if they haven't seen the Summer of Soul, the documentary about the concert in Harlem. Nina Simone has an incredible performance in that. It's a wonderful film. It's the same summer as Woodstock, and yet nobody really knew about it until, well, like the last 2 years.
Okay.
But anyway,
Yeah, thanks.
if you want to see Nina Simone live, it's amazing.
Yeah, she's amazing. Thank you.
It's called what, Carl?
Summer of Soul.
We have a copy in the library, it's on the shelf, so.
Good.
A copy, what do I play that on?
Yeah. Oh, the DVD.
Oh, what?
We have a DVD player. We may have an external DVD player.
I'm just teasing.
Ask Kate. Yeah.
Cool.
And Kathleen, so I see that there was mention that you were nominated for a 2015 Grammy Award from Dear Darwin. how did that come together?
So I wrote a manuscript of poems that had to do with Darwin. And one of them was called Dear Darwin, okay, but the whole manuscript was Dear Darwin. And I have a friend who is a singer and who teaches on campus at UMaine. And she was friends with somebody who had already done some work with her, who was a musician. And so they all got the idea that they would want to put my work on into music. And it was really fun working with them. I'd never done that before, where they would ask me, is this the way it should sound, and all this stuff. And it was great. And then they Karma recordings of Rodello recordings, basically. Had done some other CDs for Nancy, and I think for Scott also. And so they took that route. And yeah, it was nominated for Best in Voice or something, classical voice, whatever it was. But the music itself is really nice, and a lot of it really fits some of the poems that are tongue in cheek and otherwise. Yeah, that's how I got into it. Yeah, it's fun.
I have a question for both of you. Some people like this question, some people hate it, but I'm interested about where the poems come from. And if you are like scribbling them down while you're driving the car with a few words and then coming back to them later, or if you're thinking about them on a walk, and how much you rework them once the burst comes.
Yeah, I think I've gone through every which way. But I started writing poetry when I was, 8 years old, 9 years old, something like that. And so my grammar school found out about this. And they asked me to write a poem because they have this, what do they call it? Audio system that goes into all the classes, and every morning the principal or someone comes on and says, good morning, blah, blah, blah. But on holidays, they have special things. So they asked me every year for 3 or 4 years, and then I moved to another school, but to write a poem to a holiday. And that was fun, but I kind of resisted doing that ever since. And then later on, I don't think I ever stopped writing poetry, and I can't quite remember. I would write things down, jot things down. I read a lot of poetry from the time I was young, starting with the Mother Goose rhymes, of course, and trying to memorize them all, which is impossible. But in high school, we had a literary magazine, and so I got more serious about it, and with my English teacher as well. And then, but I think now as an older adult, it's very exciting because it's continued this weird pattern of waking up around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and having lines come. And then I say, am I going to get up and write them down, or am I going to forget? And why don't I have one of those pens that you can light up and write, your dreams down or something? And so I get up and go into the freezing, study and write it down. The next morning I can see, well, maybe I wrote down 5 lines or so, but only one of them is really worth saving. But I do a lot of revising, a huge amount of revising. I have a good friend, Claire Milliken, if you know her work. She hates revising. And she says, I just won't do it. And then I've had her in a lot of workshops that I do at the Farmfield Art Museum. And everyone says to her, oh, you really have 3 endings here. So she says, oh, no, I have to take something away. I like taking things out and making it more concise. And, so, what do you think?
So when you ask the question, this image always pops up. I've had this question before. They're similar. When you're walking through a field and you get those burrs, they stick to your pants or on your sleeves. That's sort of how a poem finds me. It could be something somebody says. It could be the way the sun hits the pavement. Any number of experiences might be that burr. And for over 20, I guess it's going on 30 years now, I get up at 3:45, and I write for 2 hours. It's, for me, it's sort of a job. Monday through Friday, I have that designated time. I forget who it was. It might be Stephen King, might not be Stephen King. But he said, don't wait for inspiration. It was Kurt Vonnegut. Don't wait for inspiration. And because it might not ever come, and when it comes, you might not be ready for it. So I always like that sitting one place at a designated time for a certain period. And then throughout the day, my mind is just always on writing and poetry. I'm always revising. I kind of feel like, and I love revising as well. I think I like revising process better than getting. There's such an unknown and uncertainty when you have that feeling that something needs to be out on the computer screen for me. I don't write on paper, but it's unnerving. But once it's there, now I've got some structure I can do things with this. I have skills. I know how to handle sentences, and I want the poem to not just look right on the page and find the right words, but it has to feel right in my mouth. So there's several factors that play a role there.
You have so much music in your poems. Do you listen to music when you write?
No, I don't. I do love music though, definitely. I don't listen to anything but all the voices in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is a question for you both too. I'm just curious as to what you're working on now. These books are, you finished them a year or 2 years ago, and
Yeah.
what's coming up?
I'm working on 4 manuscripts at once,
Well,
but they're mostly done. And so I'm going back and taking things out. So I like to hold on to things for a while before I send them out. Not necessarily to magazines and stuff, but to
Right.
publishers. And it's hard. It's really, really, really hard to get published as far as the books go.
Mhm.
There's so many people say poetry is dead, blah, blah. Bull. It is not dead. There are. Anytime you send to a contest, there's probably 300 other people who are, against you, whatever you want to say. But I have one that is, what happens is maybe I'll just out of the blue write something, and I like what it's doing, and I'll try something that's similar and see if it works with it, and it moves on from there where the poems are talking to each other, and. So right now I'm working on poems that have spaces. They're spaced out. And I have about 26 of them now, so I still have quite a few more to go. But I know that I'm going to call it The Spaces Between Us. The name of the book's going to be The Spaces Between Us.
Nice.
And it's really fun because sometimes I just write something out and then I figure out how the spaces work. But more and more and more, because I'm used to the spaces now, I can figure out where each thing gets spaced, and that's really a lot of fun.
What do you mean by that, by the spaces?
So I have a poem, and that the line, that's free verse. Okay. So it goes in and out anyway. And then, so now I'm working with spaces, so visually as well as writing the poem. But in the beginning, I wrote something out and then kind of figured out how to space it out. And the spaces have become sort of emotional places as well. And so they work to be part of the poem.
Are they meant as pauses?
Originally, yes, but not anymore. It's really hard to explain. They weren't when I first started. I mean, they were when I first started, sort of just pauses, right? See how that works and everything. And for a long time, I was writing poems that were just really, really, really short line, like Philip Booth or Robert Creeley or somebody, and then I thought, oh, that's their way of doing this, of spacing. And Philip always used to read da da da, and then, but he loved Robert Creeley, so he tried to copy Robert Creeley's way of writing, of reading out loud. But Robert Creeley used to read out loud. Go on, but it was very cut off. And Philip wasn't like that, but, anyway, he does have a couple. I noticed, I was looking back at his stuff a while ago, Philip Booth does have some stuff that's spaced out a little bit. I think, one of the boatyard poems or something, I forget what it is spaced out that way.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's like giving yourself room,
Yeah.
elbow room. And one of the reasons is that just before writing those poems, I was writing poems that were in the shape of squares. So they were very tight,
Yeah.
and I think I just wanted to go. Yeah. And that group of poems is called Movable Squares. It's looking for a home, if you know what
So I'm always writing poetry, and I've got a file of poems since Adrift was published last year. But I last winter wrote a novel, and so it's a work of fiction, and it's been a lot of fun. I needed a complete break from Adrift. Adrift was really emotional, and it depressed me, and it put me, and it really changed how I see my future, how I see myself, my life. It hit me in ways that I didn't expect and wasn't prepared for. Some negative, I always try to take the negative and turn it into lemonade anyway, but no less difficult. And so this novel, The Sandcakes of Oyster Cove, is it's the opposite of grief. And that's all I'll say about Sandcakes of Oyster Cove. So I've been revising that all year, rewriting that, and having a heck of a good time. It's been a lot of fun. Nice change. We'll see what North Country Press thinks.
Great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathleen and Gary, for sharing your time, your readings, your creativity, and definitely your inspiration. So I think we're all, coming out of here with a good tailwind behind our backs. So
Wow,
thank you.
nice.
Yeah.
Don't get me crossed though.
Yeah.
Back to school.
And yeah, we have some books for sale if anyone's interested. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, everybody. Have a